What's up, guys? Welcome back to Horror Stories. In today's video, you'll hear some truly terrifying real-life encounters. Stories that real people have actually experienced and lived to tell. So make sure you stick around till the end, because every single story here is absolutely worth listening to. Before we begin, please hit that subscribe button and drop a like on the video. It really helps the channel grow and I appreciate it more than you know. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. My name is David Chen and I worked as a morgue attendant at St. Augustine Medical Center in Portland, Oregon for 3 years. I'm telling you this story because I need someone else to know what happened that night in November 2019. I don't work there anymore. I can't. I was 26 when I took the job. Fresh out of mortuary science school, drowning in student loans, and this position paid better than most entry-level gigs. The work was straightforward: receive bodies, log them, prepare them for autopsy or transport, maintain the facility. Night shifts were quiet. Just me, the hum of refrigeration units, and occasionally a delivery from the ER upstairs. The morgue was in the basement, naturally. Cold tile floors, fluorescent lights that flickered sometimes, and that smell, formaldehyde mixed with industrial cleaner, that never quite masked what was underneath. There were 12 refrigerated drawers along the west wall, a preparation room, an autopsy suite, and a small office where I'd spend most of my shift doing paperwork and watching security monitors. November 14th started like any other Thursday night. I clocked in at 11 p.m. relieved Marcus from the evening shift. He seemed eager to leave, which wasn't unusual. Nobody lingered down there. I made my rounds, checked the log, 8 drawers occupied, all labeled and accounted for. I settled into the office with coffee and a sandwich, pulled up some podcasts on my phone. Around 1:30 a.m., I heard it for the first time, a soft tapping sound, rhythmic, coming from the main morgue room. I paused my podcast, listening. The tapping continued, tap, 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 then stopped. I figured it was the pipes. Old building, 40 years at least. Pipes knocked and groaned all the time. I went back to my podcast. 10 minutes later, the tapping started again. Same rhythm, same location. I muted my phone and stood up, moving to the doorway. The main morgue room stretched out before me, those 12 drawer units like sleeping giants along the wall. The overhead lights hummed. Nothing moved. The tapping stopped the moment I stepped into the room. I walked down the line of drawers, checking each one. All secured, all properly latched. I was about to head back to the office when I noticed something odd. Drawer 7, which should have contained a 63-year-old male heart attack victim named Gerald Klein, was slightly ajar. Not open, just not quite flush with the others. I pushed it closed until I heard the magnetic latch click. Secure. Back in the office, I made a note in my log. 1:42 a.m. drawer 7 found slightly open, secured, possible latch malfunction. I'd report it to maintenance in the morning. At 2:15 a.m. the temperature alarm went off, a shrill beeping that made me jump and spill coffee on my hand. The digital readout showed drawer 7 at 48 degrees Fahrenheit, well above the required 38 degrees. I swore under my breath and grabbed my keys. When I reached drawer 7, I could feel warmth radiating from the stainless steel surface. Not hot, but noticeably warmer than the others. I checked the temperature control unit on the side. It showed the compressor had shut off. I hit the reset button, heard the compressor kick back on, and the temperature readout began dropping back toward normal. Another note for maintenance. These units were old, and this wasn't the first malfunction we'd had. I returned to the office but found I couldn't concentrate on my podcast anymore. Something felt off. That tapping sound had put me on edge, and now this temperature issue with the same drawer. I pulled up the intake log on my computer to review Gerald Klein's information. White male, 63, found deceased in his home by his daughter. No suspicious circumstances. Standard autopsy scheduled for tomorrow morning. Next of kin notified. Everything routine. At 3:20 a.m. I heard footsteps. Not the tapping from before, actual footsteps. The distinct sound of shoes on tile, coming from the autopsy suite adjacent to the main morgue room. Slow, measured steps, walking in a circle. My heart started pounding. I was alone down here. The only access was through the main elevator or the emergency stairs, both of which I could see on the security monitors. Nobody had come down. I grabbed the phone, ready to call security, when the footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sound. I stared at the monitor showing the autopsy suite empty. Just the stainless steel table in the center, the surgical lights overhead, the instrument trays along the wall. I needed to check. I couldn't just sit there. I took the flashlight from my desk drawer. Even though the lights were on, I wanted it, and moved through the morgue room toward the autopsy suite. The door was closed but not locked. I pushed it open slowly. Empty. Of course it was empty, but the room was cold. Colder than it should be, even for a basement. I could see my breath misting in front of me. And there, on the floor near the autopsy table, were wet footprints. Not large. Maybe size 8 or 9 shoes. Leading from the door in a circle around the table, then stopping in the middle of the room. Just stopping. As if whoever made them had evaporated. I backed out of the autopsy suite, my hands shaking. This wasn't right. None of this was right. I returned to the office and called security. Security? This is Tom. Tom, it's David in the morgue. Can you check your monitors? Has anyone accessed the basement in the last hour? A pause, keyboard clicking. Negative, David. You're the only one down there. Everything okay? Yeah, just thought I heard something. Can you do a sweep of the basement level? Sure thing. Give me 10 minutes. I'll watch the monitors while I waited. Tom appeared on screen, walking through the corridors, checking doors. He entered the morgue area, gave me a wave through the office window, checked the autopsy suite. He emerged a few minutes later and stuck his head into the office. All clear, man. But Jesus, it's cold down here. You got the AC cranked or something? No, it's been getting colder for the past hour. I don't know why, Tom shrugged. Old building? Want me to call maintenance? No, I'll log it. Thanks for checking. After he left, I sat in the office trying to rationalize what I'd experienced. The tapping, pipes, the temperature alarm, mechanical failure, the footsteps, old building settling, the wet footprints. Maybe Tom had stepped in something, but I knew Tom's boots. Heavy, size 12 at least. Those prints were from different shoes, smaller, and they'd been there before Tom arrived. At 4:35 a.m., drawer 7 opened by itself. I was staring right at the monitor that showed the morgue room when it happened. The drawer slid open smoothly about 2 feet, then stopped. No sound, no alarm, just opened. I stood frozen in the office doorway, staring down the length of the morgue room at the open drawer. From my angle, I couldn't see inside it, just the open stainless steel drawer extending into the room like an accusation. I had to close it. That was my job. Secure the facility, maintain the bodies, keep everything in order. I walked down the morgue room, my footsteps echoing off the tile. The cold was intense now, uncomfortable even through my jacket. As I got closer to drawer 7, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. There was a hand hanging over the edge of the drawer. A pale hand, fingers slightly curled. I stopped walking. Bodies in rigor mortis didn't move like that. They certainly didn't open their own drawers. This had to be some kind of shift, a natural settling that caused the drawer to open and the hand to slip over the edge. I stepped closer. The hand was small with short fingernails, but Gerald Klein was supposed to be in this drawer, 63-year-old male. Large build according to the intake form. This was not Gerald Klein's hand. Forced myself to move closer, to look into the drawer. My flashlight beam revealed the body inside and my breath caught in my throat. It was a woman. Young, maybe late 20s. Dark hair, pale skin, wearing a white hospital gown. Her eyes were closed, her face peaceful, and she was not in the log. She was not supposed to be here. I stumbled backward, pulling out my phone to call security again, when I heard it, a soft voice, barely a whisper, coming from the drawer. He moved me. I ran. I didn't think, didn't question, just ran. I hit the emergency stairs and took them 2 at a time up to the main floor, bursting through the door into the brightly lit hospital corridor. A nurse at the station looked up, startled. "You okay?" I couldn't speak. I just stood there panting, my mind racing. Finally, I managed. "Call security." "Call them now." Something's wrong in the morgue. What they found when a team of security officers and hospital administrators went down there 15 minutes later was exactly what should have been there. Drawer 7 contained Gerald Klein, 63-year-old male, exactly where he was supposed to be. All 8 occupied drawers matched the log perfectly. No woman in a white gown, no extra body, no unexplained remains, but they also found something else. On the floor of the autopsy suite, still there despite Tom's security sweep and despite the time that had passed, wet footprints, small shoes, size 8 or 9, walking in a circle around the table, and when they checked the security footage, frame by frame, they found something that made the hospital administrator go pale. At 4:36 a.m., 1 minute after drawer 7 opened on my monitor, there was a figure in the autopsy suite, just for a single frame, barely visible. A young woman with dark hair, wearing a white gown, standing in the center of the room where the footprints ended. The hospital sealed the footage. They told me I'd experienced stress, lack of sleep, the natural anxiety of working alone in a morgue at night. They offered me time off, which I took. Then I never went back. I did some research later. In 1987, a patient died in St. Augustine Medical Center during a routine surgery. Anesthesia complication. Her name was removed from most records after a lawsuit, but I found it in old newspaper archives. Patricia Morrison, 27 years old. The surgery was in the old operating theater, which was converted into the autopsy suite in 1995. I still hear that tapping sound sometimes, late at night. Tap, 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 rhythmic, insistent, and I never work alone anymore. My name is Rebecca Torres, and I was a morgue technician at County General Hospital in Albuquerque, New Mexico. What happened to me during the summer of 2018 is the reason I switched careers entirely. I'm a dental hygienist now. The pay is worse, but I sleep better at night. I'd been working at County General for about 18 months when this happened. 24 years old, living alone in a studio apartment near the hospital, working the graveyard shift, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. My job was pretty straightforward. Intake bodies from the ER, assist with autopsies during the day shift overlap, maintain records, and keep the facility clean and organized. The morgue at County General was older than most, built in the 1960s and only partially renovated since. It consisted of a main examination room, a cold storage area with 16 wall-mounted refrigeration units, a small prep room, and a cramped office that smelled perpetually of old coffee and antiseptic. The whole place was underground, accessible only by a freight elevator or the service stairs that nobody used because they were poorly lit and smelled like mildew. July 23rd, 2018. I remember the date because it was my sister's birthday, and I'd promised to call her during my break. The shift started normally. I took over from James, the evening tech, who seemed distracted and left quickly. He mentioned something about the refrigeration in Unit 12 acting up, said he'd already called maintenance, and then he was gone. The log showed 11 bodies in storage. Nothing unusual. A typical Monday night after a typical summer weekend. 2 car accidents, 1 drowning, 3 elderly patients from the ICU, 2 homicides waiting for the medical examiner, and 3 Jane and John Does. Around midnight, I was in the office doing paperwork when the lights in the cold storage room flickered. Not the whole morgue, just that one room. I looked up from my desk and watched through the open doorway as the fluorescent tubes buzzed and dimmed, then came back to full brightness. Electrical issue. I made a note to report it. At 12:45 a.m. I heard singing. It was faint, barely audible, over the hum of the refrigeration units. A woman's voice, singing something soft and melodic. I couldn't make out the words, but the tune was haunting, sad and slow, like a lullaby. I stood up and moved to the doorway of the office, listening. The singing continued for maybe 30 seconds, then faded away. I checked the security monitor. The cold storage room was empty. The examination room was empty. I was alone. I'd heard stories from other techs about weird sounds in the morgue. Old buildings make noise. Pipes, ventilation systems, sound traveling through ducts from other parts of the hospital. I tried to convince myself it was something like that. At 1:30 a.m. I had to do an intake. The ER called down. They were sending a body. Male, approximately 40 years old, found unresponsive in his car. Suspected overdose. I prepared the gurney and waited by the freight elevator. When the elevator doors opened, 2 ER nurses wheeled out the gurney. The body was covered with a white sheet, standard protocol. I signed the transfer paperwork, and the nurses left without much conversation. They never liked lingering in the morgue. I wheeled the gurney into the examination room and began the intake process. I pulled back the sheet to examine the body and fill out the preliminary report. White male, approximately 40 years old, as stated, visible signs of drug use, track marks on both arms. His face was gaunt, eyes closed, skin pale with a bluish tint. I noted everything in my report, took photographs, then prepared to move him into cold storage. That's when I noticed his hand. It was clenched tight around something. I should have noticed it immediately, but I'd been focused on his face and arms. I tried to gently pry his fingers open. Rigor mortis hadn't fully set in yet, and found he was holding a photograph. I worked the photo free carefully. It was old, faded, the edges worn. It showed a young woman, maybe early 20s, with long dark hair and a bright smile. She was standing in front of a house, squinting into the sun. On the back, written in blue ink, Maria, always. I set the photo aside to be logged with his personal effects and continued the intake process. I assigned him to Unit 14, one of the empty refrigeration drawers, and transferred the body. As I slid the drawer closed and heard the magnetic lock engage, I felt an overwhelming sense of sadness wash over me. I don't know why. I'd processed hundreds of bodies by that point. You learn to maintain emotional distance. But something about this man, about that photograph, got to me. I returned to the office, logged the intake, and filed the photograph in an evidence bag. At 2:15 a.m., Unit 14 opened. I was sitting at my desk when I heard the distinct sound of a refrigeration drawer sliding open. Not the alarm, just the sound of metal on metal, the smooth glide of the drawer extending. I looked at the monitor showing the cold storage room. Unit 14 was open. About 3 feet. Just like that. I stared at the screen, my heart beginning to pound. These drawers didn't just open. They had magnetic locks. They required deliberate pressure on the release button to open. I grabbed my flashlight and headed into the cold storage room. The temperature hit me immediately, colder than it should be even for this room. I could see my breath in thick clouds. Unit 14 was indeed open, the drawer extended into the room. I approached slowly, every instinct telling me to call security, to not handle this alone. But I was the only tech on duty. This was my job. I looked into the drawer. The body I'd just logged, the overdose victim, was still there, exactly as I'd positioned him. But his hand, the one that had been clutching the photograph, was now extended toward the edge of the drawer. Pointing. No, not pointing. Reaching. I slammed the drawer shut and pressed the lock button 3 times, making sure it was secure. Then I stood there in the freezing room, trying to catch my breath, trying to rationalize. Bodies don't move like that. Muscle spasms, maybe, in the first few hours. But not purposeful movement. Not reaching? I was about to leave when I heard the singing again. That same woman's voice, clearer now, coming from inside the walls. No, coming from inside the refrigeration units. Moving from drawer to drawer like it was searching for something. Maria, the voice sang, drawing out the name. Maria, where are you? I backed toward the door, my flashlight beam shaking across the rows of closed drawers. The voice continued, growing louder, more desperate. Maria, I'm sorry. Maria, please. Then I realized it was coming from Unit 14. I ran to the office and called security. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial. Security, this is Mike. Mike, it's Rebecca in the morgue.
I need someone down here now. Right now. What's wrong?
Just send someone, please. Mike arrived 6 minutes later with another guard named Derek. By the time they got there, the singing had stopped. The cold storage room had returned to its normal temperature. Unit 14 was closed and locked. What's going on, Rebecca? Mike asked, his hand resting on his radio. I tried to explain. The drawer opening by itself. The singing, the voice calling for Maria. As I spoke, I could see the skepticism in their faces. Derek walked into the cold storage room and checked Unit 14. It's secure, he called out. You want us to open it?
No, I said too quickly. No, just...
Can you check the other units?
Make sure everything's secure?
They did a full sweep. Everything was in order. All 11 bodies, now 12 with the new intake exactly where they should be. No signs of tampering, no mechanical issues, no explanation for what I'd experienced. After they left, I sat in the office trying to calm down. I pulled up the intake file for the overdose victim and started reading through the details the ER had sent over. Name, Michael Reyes, age 41. Found deceased in his vehicle in the parking lot of an apartment complex on 4th Street. Then I saw the next of kin information. Maria Reyes, wife, presumed deceased 2016. My blood went cold. I clicked through to the notes section. 2 years ago, Maria Reyes had died in a car accident. Michael had been driving. He'd survived. She hadn't. According to the police report attached to his file, he'd struggled with addiction since her death. Multiple overdoses, multiple interventions, the photograph, the one he'd been clutching. Maria, always. At 3:30 a.m., every drawer in the cold storage room opened at once. I saw it happen on the monitor. All 16 units sliding open in perfect synchronization, silent, smooth, impossible. I didn't go in there. I stood in the doorway of the office and stared down the corridor at the cold storage room. 16 open drawers extending into the room like metal tongues. Then the singing started again, but this time it wasn't one voice. It was multiple voices overlapping, creating a dissonant harmony that made my skin crawl. And underneath it all, I heard a man's voice, sobbing, saying, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, over and over. The lights began to flicker.
Not just in the cold storage room now, but throughout the entire morgue.
The fluorescent tubes buzzed and dimmed, casting everything in shadows. In those moments of darkness, I saw movement in the cold storage room.
Shapes sitting up in the drawers, figures standing. I grabbed my bag and ran for the freight elevator.
I pressed the call button repeatedly, desperately. The lights continued to flicker. Behind me, I heard footsteps, multiple footsteps, coming down the corridor from the cold storage room. The elevator doors opened. I lunged inside and hammered the button for the ground floor. As the doors began to close, I saw them in the corridor, silhouettes, standing in a line, watching me leave. The last thing I heard before the doors shut completely was that singing voice. He found her. He finally found her. When hospital security went down to investigate 15 minutes later, they found all 16 drawers closed and locked. Every body accounted for. Everything in perfect order, except for Unit 14. When they opened it to check, Michael Reyes's body had a different expression. His face, which had been drawn and anguished during intake, now looked peaceful, almost smiling, and the photograph that I'd logged in the evidence bag was gone.
They never found it. I finished my shift from the security office.
I filed my report, knowing no one would believe it. 2 weeks later, I gave my notice. I drive past County General sometimes. The building is still there, the morgue still operating.
I wonder if the new night tech hears the singing.
I wonder if they've learned to just ignore it. I haven't.
On quiet nights, when I'm alone, I still hear that voice calling for Maria. And I remember the look on those silhouettes' faces as the elevator doors closed. Some people search for each other, even in death. And some places hold on to those who can't let go. I just wish I hadn't been there to witness it.
My name is Marcus Williams, and I worked as a morgue assistant at Memorial Hospital in Detroit, Michigan from 2017 to 2019. I'm a paramedic now, which is ironic because I deal with death more often in this job. But at least the bodies are fresh and the situations make sense. What happened to me on February the 9th, 2019 defies any logical explanation, and I've spent years trying to forget it. I was 29 years old, newly divorced, and picking up every extra shift I could to pay off my half of our debts. When someone called in sick for the overnight shift, I volunteered even though I'd already worked the evening shift.
A double meant 16 hours straight, but it also meant double time and a half. I needed the money. Memorial's morgue was relatively modern, renovated in 2012. White walls,
Good lighting, digital temperature controls, and 20 refrigerated units arranged in 2 rows of 10. There was a large autopsy theatre with observation windows. Memorial was a teaching hospital, a prep room, a staff break room, and a small office with security monitors. The evening shift had been busy. A multi-car pileup on I-94 brought in 4 bodies within an hour. By the time my supervisor, Dr. Patricia Okonkwo, left at 11 p.m., we had 17 of 20 units occupied. She seemed concerned about leaving me alone. "You sure you're okay to handle the overnight solo?" she asked, gathering her things. "You've been here since 3 p.m. I'm good, Dr. O, need the hours." She hesitated at the door. "Marcus, if anything feels off, call security. Don't try to handle problems yourself." "What kind of problems?"
just
"Call if you need anything." Strange thing to say, but I chalked it up to her being tired. She'd been on shift since 7 a.m. The first few hours were quiet. I did paperwork, restocked supplies, and ate the sandwich I'd packed for dinner, or breakfast, depending on how you looked at it. Around 1 a.m. I did my routine check of all the units, verifying that temperatures were stable and everything was secure. Unit 9 caught my attention. The temperature display showed 39 degrees, which was fine, but the drawer itself felt warm to the touch. Not hot, but noticeably warmer than the others. I checked the internal sensor, 39 degrees. The cooling system was working fine. Maybe the external surface was just slow to cool down. I made a note anyway. At 1:45 a.m. I was in the break room making coffee when I heard a crash from the autopsy theatre. I grabbed my flashlight out of habit. The theatre lights were on. I could see them through the break room window and headed over. The theatre was empty, but one of the surgical instrument trays had fallen from the counter. Scalpels, forceps, and clamps were scattered across the floor. I cleaned up the mess, restacked the instruments, and checked the counter. It was level, stable. There was no reason for that tray to fall unless someone had placed it too close to the edge, but I knew the evening shift protocol. Everything got secured properly. As I was leaving the theatre, I noticed condensation on the observation windows.
heavy condensation like someone had been breathing on the glass from inside.
But I'd been the only one in there, and I hadn't been near the windows. I wiped it away with my sleeve and returned to the office, feeling uneasy. At 2:30 a.m., Unit 9's alarm went off. The shrill beeping echoed through the morgue. I checked the monitor. Unit 9 had spiked to 52 degrees. I ran to the cold storage area and felt the drawer. It was hot now, almost uncomfortable to touch. I hit the emergency cooling override, and the compressor kicked into high gear with a loud rumble. The temperature began dropping, but slowly. Too slowly.
I called maintenance. Maintenance, this is Ray. Ray, it's Marcus in the morgue.
I've got a cooling failure on Unit 9. Temperature spiked to 52 degrees. I've engaged emergency cooling, but I might need someone to check the compressor. 52.
Jesus, okay, I'll send someone down. Give me 20 minutes. I stayed by Unit 9 watching the temperature display.
It crept down degree by degree, 51, 50, 49. As it hit 47 degrees, I heard something that made my heart stop. A voice,
muffled but distinct. "Coming from inside Unit 9. Let me out!" I stepped back from the drawer, my mind racing. No, impossible. Bodies don't talk.
Bodies don't speak.
This was some kind of acoustic illusion, sound traveling through the ventilation system. "Please, let me out." The voice was clearer now, male, young, desperate. My hands shook as I reached for the drawer release. Every bit of training screamed at me not to open it.
Protocol said never open a drawer during a temperature malfunction.
Wait for maintenance.
But that voice, I pulled the release and slid the drawer open. The body inside was a young man, maybe early 20s, black male, athletic build. He'd come in during the evening shift, gunshot victim from a gang-related incident in the East Side. I'd helped log him myself.
His name was Terence Booker.
He'd been dead for 6 hours. His eyes were still closed.
His chest wasn't moving.
He was exactly as I'd left him, but his mouth was open. And his lips were moving. "Cold," the voice whispered. Not from his mouth, I realized. From somewhere else. From everywhere. So cold.
"Why is it so cold?"
I slammed the drawer shut and backed away, my breath coming in short gasps. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. The temperature display on Unit 9 now read 44 degrees and dropping. The alarm had stopped. Everything was returning to normal, except nothing was normal. I went back to the office and tried to steady myself. Stress. I was stressed, exhausted, working a double shift. I was hearing things, seeing things that weren't there. I drank some water and checked the security monitors. That's when I saw him. On the monitor showing the autopsy theater, there was someone standing in the center of the room. A young man in street clothes, jeans, a red hoodie, white sneakers. He was looking directly at the security camera. I recognized him. Terence Booker, the gunshot victim in Unit 9. I spun around to look through the office window into the actual autopsy theater. Empty. No one there. I looked back at the monitor. He was still there, still staring at the camera. Then he pointed down at the floor. My phone rang, making me jump. It was Ray from maintenance. "Marcus, I'm in the elevator. Be there in a minute."
"How's that unit doing?" It's
stabilized. Back to 38 degrees. "Good. I'll still check it out, make sure the compressor isn't failing." When Ray arrived, I was grateful for the company. He went straight to Unit 9 and began his inspection. I stayed in the office, unable to take my eyes off the monitor showing the autopsy theater. Terence was still there.
"Just standing,"
pointing at the floor. "Hey, Marcus!" Ray called out. "Come look at this." I forced myself to leave the office and join him at Unit 9. He'd opened the access panel on the cooling unit. "See this?" He pointed to a small pool of dark liquid at the base of the compressor. "Coolant leak. Explains the temperature spike. But look where it's leaking from." He directed his flashlight to a copper coil. There was a hole in it. Not a crack or a rupture, a perfect circular hole, maybe the size of a bullet. "That's weird," Ray said. "Almost looks like something punctured it from inside the drawer." "From inside?" "Yeah, but that's impossible. These units are solid."
"Nothing from inside could..." He stopped, looking at the body in the drawer. "Wait, what was this guy in for?"
"Gunshot wound, chest." Ray was quiet for a moment. "Which side?"
"Left side. Why?"
He pointed to the location of the puncture in the coil. "This hole lines up with about where his chest would be. If he was lying on his right side, he's on his back."
"I positioned him myself," Ray shrugged. "Then I got no explanation."
"I'll replace this coil and get Unit 9 back online. Give me 30 minutes. While Ray worked, I returned to the office. The monitor showing the autopsy theater now displayed an empty room.
Terence was gone. I felt a mix of relief and dread. At 3:15 a.m., I heard footsteps above me, not in the morgue, above the morgue.
The morgue was in the basement. Directly above us was a storage area that hadn't been used in years. The hospital had sealed it off during the 2012 renovation. The footsteps were slow and deliberate, pacing back and forth across the ceiling. I could track the movement by sound, starting at the east end, walking west, turning, walking back. Ray heard it too. He looked up from his work. "Someone up there?" "That area's been closed for 7 years. You sure?"
"Positive." The footsteps continued.
Ray set down his tools.
"I'm going to call security." "Yeah, good idea." Security sent 2 guards, Jennifer and Paul. They checked the sealed entrance to the storage area.
Locked, undisturbed, covered in dust. No one had been through that door in years. But we could all hear the footsteps above us. Paul radioed for a supervisor. "We need someone with master keys to check the old storage area. We've got reports of movement up there." While we waited, the footsteps stopped. The sudden silence was worse than the sound. Ray finished his repair on Unit 9 and tested it. Temperature holding steady at 38 degrees, Jennifer's radio crackled. "Security, we've accessed the storage area."
"It's empty. No signs of entry."
"Whatever you're hearing, it's not footsteps, but we'd all heard them. 4 people, all hearing the same thing. After security left, after Ray finished and left, I was alone again. It was 4:30 a.m., less than 3 hours until the day shift arrived. I sat in the office, drinking cold coffee, trying to stay awake. On the monitor, I watched Unit 9, watched for any sign of movement, any indication that what I'd heard earlier was real. At 5:10 a.m., the door to the autopsy theater opened by itself. Not quickly, slowly, smoothly, as if someone was being careful not to make noise. On the monitor, I watched the door swing wide. The theater remained empty. Then I saw him again. Terence. Standing just inside the doorway, still wearing that red hoodie. This time he wasn't pointing down. He was pointing at me.
At the office, I couldn't move, couldn't breathe.
He started walking toward the office, moving closer to the camera, his image getting larger on the screen until his face filled the entire monitor. His lips moved. "Check under the floor." The screen went black, all the monitors went black. The lights in the office flickered once and died. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in dim red light. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. The main power was out, but the refrigeration units had backup generators. They were still running. I called security again.
No answer. I called maintenance. No answer. I tried the main hospital switchboard. Nothing. It was as if every phone line to the morgue had gone dead. I was walking toward the exit when I heard it. A scraping sound. Metal on concrete.
Coming from the autopsy theater. Against every instinct, I moved toward the sound. The theater was dark except for the emergency lights. In their red glow, I could see that one of the floor drains had been disturbed. The metal grate was pushed aside and there was a hole in the floor. I approached slowly, shining my phone's light into the opening. The hole wasn't deep, maybe 3 feet. But there was something down there, a red hoodie, white sneakers, and beneath them, barely visible in my flashlight beam, bones, old bones, a skull, a full skeleton, partially crushed, lying in the crawl space beneath the theater floor. The power came back on.
Lights blazed.
The monitors in the office flickered to life. I stood there, staring into that hole, my mind trying to process what I was seeing. When security arrived at shift change, I'd been calling them every 5 minutes once the phones worked again. They found me sitting on the floor next to that hole.
Unable to speak, the police came.
The bones were recovered. Forensics determined they belonged to a male, approximately 20 to 25 years old, dead for approximately 7 years. Dental records identified him as Terence Booker Sr. He'd been a maintenance worker at Memorial Hospital. In 2012, during the morgue renovation, he disappeared, simply vanished one day during his shift.
No one knew what happened to him. Until now, the gunshot victim I'd logged, Terence Booker Jr. Same name.
His son. I left Memorial Hospital that morning and never returned. The hospital tried to keep it quiet, but eventually the story leaked. A body hidden beneath the autopsy theater floor for 7 years. They say Terence Sr. had been murdered over a drug debt, and hidden there during the construction. They say his son never knew what happened to his father, spent years searching. And on the night his son's body arrived at the morgue, 7 years after his death, Terence Sr. finally found a way to be discovered. I don't know if I believe in ghosts, but I know what I heard in Unit 9.
I know what I saw on those monitors. Sometimes the dead have unfinished business.
Sometimes they just want to be found, and sometimes they'll do whatever it takes to make sure their story is finally told. My name is Jennifer Kozlowski, and I was a morgue attendant at Riverside Medical in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I worked there for 2 years before what happened in October 2020 made me quit. I'm a medical records clerk now, still in healthcare, but as far from the dead as I can manage. I was 27 when I took the job at Riverside. The pay was decent, the hours were flexible, and I didn't mind working alone.
I've never been squeamish about death.
My grandmother was a funeral director, and I grew up understanding that dead bodies are just empty vessels. Nothing to fear. I was wrong. The morgue at Riverside was split level, which was unusual. The main floor had the intake area, a prep room, and the office. Down a short flight of stairs was the cold storage, a long, narrow room with 12 refrigeration units along one wall and the autopsy suite at the far end. The whole place had been built in the 1980s and had that institutional beige tile and flickering fluorescent
Aesthetic that made everything feel slightly
depressing. October 17th, 2020, Saturday night. I'd volunteered for the weekend shift because the regular attendant, Carol, had COVID. The hospital was overwhelmed. Milwaukee was in the middle of a surge, and the morgue was fuller than I'd ever seen it. 11 of the 12 units were occupied, mostly elderly patients who died on the COVID ward. I clocked in at 11 p.m. The evening supervisor, Dr. Hassan, met me in the office. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes. Busy night? I asked. 3 more coming down from ICU within the hour. We're going to need to use the backup storage. Riverside had a secondary cold storage room that we only used during mass casualty events, or apparently pandemics. It was accessed through a door at the back of the autopsy suite, an older system, manual temperature controls, dim lighting. We called it the overflow. I've already moved 2 into overflow, Dr. Hassan said. You might need to move more if we get additional intakes. I've left the door unlocked. After he left, I did my rounds. The main cold storage was full. Units 1 through 11 occupied. I checked the temperature logs, verified the records, then headed down to the autopsy suite to check on overflow. The overflow room was cold and cramped, maybe 12 by 15 feet, with 6 wall-mounted units that looked like they'd been installed during the Cold War. 2 were occupied, units A and C. The temperature gauge on the wall showed 36 degrees. Good enough. As I turned to leave, I heard humming. Not the mechanical hum of refrigeration, actual humming. A tune, coming from inside one of the units. I stood perfectly still listening. The humming continued for about 10 seconds, then stopped. I waited. Nothing. I checked the paperwork for Units A and C. Unit A contained an 83-year-old woman, Margaret Schultz. COVID death. Unit C contained a 70-year-old man, Robert Chen. Also COVID. I returned to the office, telling myself I'd imagined it. The ventilation system maybe, sound, traveling through the ducts. At midnight, I had my first intake of the night. The ER called incoming body from the COVID ward.
female, 68 years old.
I prepared the gurney and met the transport team at the elevator. They wheeled her in, both wearing full PPE, gowns, N95 masks, face shields. Nobody spoke more than necessary. After they left, I processed the intake. Eleanor Voss, 68, died at 11:32 p.m., COVID pneumonia.
I took her downstairs to cold storage.
Unit 12, the last available spot in the main room. As I slid the drawer closed, I heard it again, that humming. The same tune coming from somewhere nearby. I looked around the empty storage room. The sound seemed to be coming from Unit 7. I pulled up the log on my tablet. Unit 7, Margaret Schultz's daughter, Barbara Schultz, age 62. COVID death.
Admitted 3 days ago, mother and daughter.
Both dead from COVID, both in my morgue. The humming stopped. At 1:15 a.m. I got a call from the ICU. 2 more bodies incoming within the next hour. I'd need to move someone to overflow. I decided to move the most recent intake, Eleanor Voss from Unit 12. I wheeled the gurney downstairs, transferred her body, and brought her to the overflow room. I placed her in Unit B, right between Margaret Schultz and Robert Chen. As I logged the transfer on my tablet, the lights in the overflow room flickered.
Once, twice, then steadied.
The temperature gauge on the wall began to climb, 37, 38, 39 degrees. I checked the thermostat. It was set correctly at 35 degrees. I turned it down to 32 and the compressor kicked on with a loud rattle. The temperature display stopped climbing but didn't drop. I made a note to call maintenance and headed back upstairs. At 2:30 a.m., both new bodies arrived within minutes of each other. 2 men, both in their 70s, both COVID. I processed them quickly and placed them in Units 11 and 12. The main cold storage was now completely full. I was washing my hands in the prep room when I heard a crash from downstairs. I grabbed my flashlight and headed down to the cold storage area. Everything looked normal, all 12 units closed and secure. But the crash had definitely come from down here. Then I heard voices, multiple voices talking over each other.
Muffled but distinct.
Coming from the autopsy suite. I moved slowly down the storage room toward the suite. The voices grew louder as I approached.
I couldn't make out words, just the cadence of conversation.
Multiple people having a discussion. I pushed open the door to the autopsy suite. Empty. Silent. But the door to overflow was wide open. I'd closed it. I specifically remembered closing it after placing Eleanor Voss inside. Now it stood open, and the overflow room beyond was dark. The lights were off. I reached inside and flipped the switch. The fluorescent tubes buzzed and flickered to life. All 3 occupied units, A, B, and C, were open. The drawers extended fully into the room. I felt my heart pounding in my chest. I approached Unit B first, Eleanor Voss. Her body was exactly as I'd left it, lying peacefully on the tray. But her hand was different. It was reaching out over the edge of the drawer, pointing toward Unit A. I moved to Unit A, Margaret Schultz. The elderly woman's body was also reaching out, her arm extended, pointing toward Unit C, and Unit C, Robert Chen, his arm extended, pointing back toward Unit A. They were pointing at each other.
Forming a triangle, I heard the humming again.
That same tune. But now I recognized it. It was "You Are My Sunshine." And it was coming from all 3 bodies at once. I backed out of the overflow room and slammed the door shut.
I ran upstairs to the office, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial security. Security, this is Tom. Tom, I need someone in the morgue right now.
Something's wrong with the overflow storage. What kind of wrong? Just send someone, please. Tom arrived 5 minutes later with another guard named Michelle. I tried to explain what I'd seen, the open drawers, the pointing hands, the humming.
They exchanged glances. Show us, Tom said. We went downstairs together.
The door to overflow was closed. I opened it slowly. The lights were on. All 3 units were closed and locked. Everything normal. Tom checked each unit. They're all secure, Jennifer. Temperature's a little high, 39 degrees, but nothing unusual. They were open, all 3 of them. The bodies were reaching out. Hey, Michelle said gently. You've been working a lot of overtime, right? This pandemic has everyone stretched thin. Maybe you should take a break. After they left, I sat in the office staring at the security monitor that showed the overflow room. The camera angle only captured the door and part of the room, but I could see the temperature gauge on the wall. It read 39 degrees. And as I watched, it climbed to 40, then 41. I went back down to check it. The moment I entered the overflow room, I felt it. Warmth. The room was warm. Not cold at all. I looked at the bodies in units A, B, and C. Through the small windows on each drawer, I could see their faces.
And I swear to God, they were smiling. I called maintenance.
Ray answered, groggy and annoyed. Ray, the overflow cooling system is failing.
Temperature is at 42 and climbing. Jesus, okay, I'll be there in 20 minutes.
While I waited, I researched the 3 bodies in overflow. Margaret Schultz and Eleanor Voss. I discovered they'd known each other. They'd been roommates on the COVID ward before they died. And Robert Chen had been in the same ward, in the adjacent room. They died within days of each other, alone. No visitors allowed because of COVID protocols. They'd spent their final days isolated, scared, surrounded by strangers in hazmat suits. Ray arrived and checked the cooling system. Compressors shot, he said.
I can't fix this tonight.
You'll need to move these bodies back to main storage. Main storage is full. Then you'll have to double up. Put 2 in the larger units. We can't leave them in here. I moved Robert Chen first, placing him in Unit 6 with another male patient. Then Margaret Schultz, doubling her up in Unit 3 with another elderly woman. When I returned for Eleanor Voss, I noticed something that made me stop cold. On the wall above Unit B, someone had written a message. In condensation, the letter's already starting to fade. Thank you for putting us together. I stood there,
staring at those words, and that's when I understood. These people had died alone, isolated, scared, and somehow...
In death, I'd given them what they'd been denied in life, companionship. Even if just for a few hours.
Even if just in a cold storage room. I moved Eleanor to main storage, closing down the overflow room.
The temperature began to drop back to normal immediately. The rest of my shift was quiet.
No more humming. No more open drawers.
No more messages on walls, but at 6 a.m., just before the day shift arrived, I went back down to check on the bodies I'd moved. Units 3 and 6, where I'd doubled up the patients. Through the small windows, I could see their faces, and they all looked peaceful. More peaceful than any bodies I'd ever seen. I quit 3 weeks later, not because I was scared, but because I couldn't handle it anymore. The sheer volume of death, the isolation, the way COVID had stripped away every dignity from dying. But I think about those 3 sometimes, Margaret and Eleanor and Robert. I think about how they found each other in that overflow room, how they reached out to one another even after death. The hospital eventually closed down the overflow room permanently. Too many mechanical failures, they said. The cooling system kept breaking down, always climbing to exactly 42 degrees before failing completely. I know better. Some places hold on to the warmth of human connection, even in the coldest rooms. Some people refuse to die alone even after they're already gone, and sometimes, in the darkest places, the dead find ways to comfort each other that the living never can. My name is Sarah Chen, and I was a night morgue technician at Mercy General Hospital in Boston, Massachusetts. What happened to me on Christmas Eve 2021 is the reason I can't celebrate the holidays anymore. I'm a lab technician now, working with blood samples and tissue cultures, things that are definitely, absolutely dead. I was 31 years old and had been working at Mercy General for 4 years. Christmas Eve was double pay, and I needed the money. My father's cancer treatments had drained my savings. When the scheduler asked for volunteers, I was the first to raise my hand. Mercy General's morgue was old, built in 1952 with that Cold War-era institutional design. Grey concrete walls, heavy steel doors, and 8 refrigeration units that hummed constantly like sleeping giants. There was a main examination room with steel tables, a small office with a space heater that barely worked, and a utility closet that smelled like formaldehyde and old mops. I arrived at 11 p.m. on December 24th. The evening tech, a guy named Phil, seemed eager to leave. "Quiet night," he said, pulling on his coat. "Only 3 occupied."
Everyone else is at home with their families, I guess. Even the dying. Which units?
2, 5, and 8.
All logged. Temperature's good.
You should have an easy shift. After he left, I made my rounds. Unit 2 contained a homeless man, John Doe, found frozen in an alley. Unit 5 held an elderly woman named Rose Patterson who died in the ICU. Unit 8 was a teenage boy. Tyler Morrison, car accident victim. I returned to the office and settled in with hot chocolate I'd brought from home. Through the small window, I could see the examination room and the row of closed refrigeration units. Outside, snow had started to fall. It looked peaceful. At 11:45 p.m., I heard singing Christmas carols.
Silent Night, specifically?
A woman's voice, clear and beautiful, coming from somewhere in the morgue. I stood up and checked the security monitor. The examination room was empty. I checked the audio settings. No radio, no speakers, nothing that could produce sound except the intercom system, which was off. The singing continued. I walked into the examination room, trying to pinpoint the source. The voice seemed to be coming from Unit 5, Rose Patterson. The elderly woman. I stood by Unit 5 listening. The singing was definitely coming from inside.
Not possible, I told myself.
Sound traveling through ventilation, maybe. Or I was tired, hearing things. The singing stopped mid-verse. I returned to the office and logged the incident. 11:47 p.m., possible audio hallucination or ventilation system carrying sound. Investigate in morning. At 12:15 a.m., the lights went out, not flickering, just straight to darkness. The backup generator kicked in immediately, but instead of the normal fluorescent lighting, only the emergency lights came on, casting everything in a dim, greenish glow. I called maintenance. No answer. I tried security.
The line was dead. I checked my cell phone. No signal. That wasn't normal.
The morgue was in the basement, but I usually had at least one bar. I was reaching for my flashlight when I heard footsteps. Someone was walking in the examination room. Slow, deliberate steps on the tile floor. I looked through the office window. A woman stood in the center of the room, elderly, wearing a hospital gown, with white hair and a gentle face. She was looking directly at me, Rose Patterson. From Unit 5, I couldn't move.
Couldn't breathe.
She smiled at me, a kind, grandmotherly smile, and then she spoke. He's so cold. The boy is so cold. I blinked, and she was gone. The examination room was empty. I grabbed my flashlight with shaking hands and ran to Unit 5. I slid the drawer open. Rose Patterson's body was there, exactly as it should be.
Eyes closed, hands folded, completely still. I closed the drawer and checked the temperature display.
Unit 5, 38 degrees, normal. Then I checked Unit 8. Tyler Morrison, the teenage car accident victim. The temperature display read 28 degrees, 8 degrees below normal. The drawer itself was covered in frost. I hit the temperature override, increasing the setting. The compressor noise changed pitch, working harder. But the temperature display didn't change. It stayed at 28 degrees. I opened the drawer to check the body. Tyler Morrison lay there, a boy of maybe 16, brown hair, his face peaceful, despite the trauma that had killed him. But his skin was covered in frost.
Ice crystals had formed on his eyelashes, his lips, his hospital gown. This wasn't right.
Even in a malfunctioning unit, bodies didn't freeze like this. Not this quickly. I heard a sound behind me and spun around. A man stood at the far end of the room, middle-aged, wearing ragged clothes, his face weathered and rough. The homeless man from Unit 2. He shouldn't be alone, the man said. His voice was hoarse, as if he'd been screaming.
Not tonight.
Nobody should be alone tonight. You're not real, I whispered. He's just a kid.
Died on his way to see his grandmother. Christmas Eve. Shouldn't die on Christmas Eve. I backed toward the office, my eyes locked on the homeless man.
He didn't move, just stood there watching me with sad, hollow eyes. Help him, he said.
Please. I ran into the office and slammed the door. I tried the phone again. Still dead.
Cell phone, no signal. I was trapped in the basement with 3 bodies, at least 2 of which were apparently walking around. At 1:30 a.m., all 3 units opened simultaneously. I watched on the security monitor as Units 2, 5 and 8 slid open in perfect synchronization. 3 bodies sitting up in their drawers. Rose Patterson, the homeless man, and Tyler Morrison. They climbed out of their drawers.
Moved like living people, not the stiff awkwardness of corpses.
They gathered in the center of the examination room, standing in a small circle. Rose put her hand on Tyler's shoulder. The homeless man stood on his other side. They looked like a family, a strange, impossible family. Then they began to sing, all three of them singing Silent Night in harmony. Their voices echoed through the morgue, beautiful and heartbreaking. I should have been terrified.
I should have been screaming, trying to escape.
But instead, I found myself crying, because I understood these were people who died alone.
Rose in the ICU with no family.
The homeless man, frozen in an alley where no one would find him for hours. And Tyler, bleeding out in a wrecked car on his way to his grandmother's house. They died alone on Christmas Eve. And somehow, in death, they'd found each other. I don't know how long I sat there listening to them sing. It felt like hours. The songs changed. Silent Night became Oh Holy Night, then I'll Be Home for Christmas. At 2:47 a.m., the lights came back on. Full power, normal fluorescent lighting flooding the morgue. I looked at the security monitor. Units 2, 5, and 8 were closed. Everything was as it should be. I walked into the examination room on trembling legs. The units were cold to the touch, temperature displays all reading 38 degrees. Even Unit 8 had returned to normal. I opened each drawer and checked. All three bodies were there, lying peacefully, showing no signs of having moved. But on the floor in the center of the room, where I'd seen them standing and singing, there was a pattern in the dust. 3 sets of footprints forming a circle. At 6:30 a.m., when the morning shift arrived, I tried to explain what had happened. The supervisor, Dr. Martinez, listened patiently, then pulled up the security footage. "Sarah, there's nothing here. Look." He showed me the recording from the night. At 12:15 a.m., the lights went out. At 2:47 a.m., they came back on. In between, the camera showed nothing but an empty examination room with 3 closed units. No walking bodies.
No singing? Nothing. You've been working too much, Dr. Martinez said gently.
"Go home, get some rest. We'll talk after the holiday." I went home, but I couldn't rest. I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen and heard. 3 days later, I went back to review the intake files for those 3 bodies. Rose Patterson had no family. Her funeral was paid for by the state, attended by no one. The homeless man, they'd eventually identified him as Robert Walsh, had no known relatives. He was cremated, ashes scattered in a municipal garden. Tyler Morrison's funeral was held on December 28th. His grandmother, the one he'd been driving to see, died of a heart attack on Christmas morning when she learned about the accident. 3 people who died alone, who had no one to mourn them, who spent Christmas Eve in a cold morgue instead of with family. But they weren't alone. Not really. They found each other. I quit Mercy General in January. I couldn't work there anymore, not after understanding what I'd witnessed. But I think about them every Christmas Eve, Rose, Robert, and Tyler, singing carols in an empty morgue. The morgue was demolished in 2023 when Mercy General built a new facility. During the demolition, workers found something strange. Behind one of the walls in the old examination room, someone had carved 3 names and a date: Rose, Robert, Tyler, Christmas Eve, 2021. No one knows who carved it or when. The wall was solid concrete, undamaged until demolition. It should have been impossible, but I know the truth. Some bonds transcend death. Some families are formed in the darkest places. And some nights, when the world is at its loneliest, the dead find ways to comfort each other that the living never could. I don't celebrate Christmas anymore. But on Christmas Eve at exactly 12:15 a.m., I play Silent Night on my phone. I play it for 3 people I never really knew, but will never forget. And sometimes, if I listen carefully, I can hear other voices joining in. 3 voices singing in perfect harmony, reminding me that no one, living or dead, should ever be alone on Christmas Eve.